Hi, I'm Blarg257, and welcome to the Weekly Dashdance, where you look at where Melee's just been, where it's about to be, and how it might get there. And those of you who saw last week's show might expect me to begin with a victory for a certain Peach. Okay, this is a nectarine. But regardless, here comes that story with the recap of Smash Factor 7. Armada and Nun, easily identifiable as the two best players in the room, made it to winners finals over Nintendude and DJ Nintendo, respectively. Nintendude was able to make it to loser semis after beating Javi, but DJ could not, as he lost the set to Bimbo Mexico, who became the highest placing Mexican over Javi and Eddie. Bimbo actually was in the middle of a giant losers run, as after losing in round 2 pools to Ice Climber MC Mike, made top 24, took 3 Game 5 sets in a row over Uncle Mojo, Far and You, then beat Meds fresh off his second win over Luna this year. He couldn't take Nintendude, but he'd taken more than enough already. After beating him, Nintendude could not hold back Nun, but even more so, Nun could not hold back Armada, who 3-0'd him both in winners and grand finals to be crowned champion of Smash Factor 7. Simply what we've come to expect from the greatest of all time. The top 8 was Armada at first, Nun at second, Nintendude at third, Bimbo at fourth, DJ Nintendo and Javi at fifth, and Meds and Azza at seventh. Alright folks, get ready. We are entering the 3 most important weeks of the year for the competitive circuit. The time is now to soak it up, and Low Tier City 6 is going to welcome us all to the peak of this year's Summer of Smash. Of the 344 registered attendees, only about 15 are in the area around top 100, but oh, what a 15 they are. And they're headlined by Hungrybox, Armada, Mango, and Leffen. The best in the world is here, with proven challengers, an enticing setup as it always is. Though the sets will not be anything new, their matchups most look forward to. Among the challengers looking to prevent those matchups are some of the most exciting players I can name in both play and storyline. S2J, Hugs, Nun, Cyrox, Lucky, Army, Android, Absent Page, and Dreffen will be running headlong at the men on the Pantheon looking to cause trouble, and whatever unfolds should be worth seeing. Also, I'd just briefly like to shout out Cascade 2, a regional in Vancouver, taking place at the same time. It'll be Kamaster vs Spark vs Kalamazoo up there, and if you'd like a lower level battle, there it is. Now you may wonder why I bothered doing that. Well, it got brought up at Melee at the Maid, the weekly in Oakland that I commentate, which was attended this week by Spark. He was seeded first, and the second seed was Ralph, who was very good against Sheik, so the assumption would be that Grands would be between them, but someone had a whole nother thing coming for us. And that someone was Diplomatic Toucan, an ice climber ranked in the lower 4th of the NorCal Power Ranking. He won his first and second matches, the latter against me, which was horrifying to be honest, but let's not talk about that. Then ran through Ralph, YCZ, Spark, and Ralph again to take the tournament. And as he sat there pulling wobbles out of thin air, then ending them with a forward air just because he could, I was reminded of something that Nintendude said a while ago when he quit Ice Climbers, that they're not major viable anymore, and that his interests would be best spent elsewhere. But if you're paying attention, you'll notice that Nintendude's playing Ices in the clips I showed of him. Those clips aren't doctored. That really happened, and boy, did it show. Even though he said he'd quit practicing the character last July, the Nintendude of old returned out of the blue, destroying Meds, Javi, and Bimbo with the character and taking a game from Nun. So, I think with these two things around me, it's a good time for me to weigh in a little on the question of whether or not Ices are workable at the top. Now bear in mind that I am not at the top, or close to that. So, I'm mostly going to be basing what I say on observations of people who are. The focus of this debate is obviously the wobble. Regardless of whether or not you like it, you have to agree that it defines the character. Nintendude himself said 3 years ago in the run-up to his prime that it's an awful mechanic that makes everything else you could possibly do obsolete. And after making attempts to move away from the wobble, Wobbles himself could find few answers and ended up playing a little Falco. Fly Amanita has made wobble-less climbers work at the top, but that was years ago, and it's hard to say whether or not someone else could do it, assuming he won't. Me personally, I agree with the sentiment that the wobble is the crux of the character as a competitive thought. It makes wobble climbers work, but even less wobble-heavy climbers should be aware of it and know how to use it. Look at this classic, for instance. The instant Fly hits this grab, Kirby Kaze should be dead, but that's not how he rolls, and as Toph says...
But it's Fly Amanita.
And he did a back throw. It said nothing.
The question I want to ask is, given that ice climbers have an infinite, and the setup, while disruptible, is readily attainable, what should we make of them? It's easy to look at Mango, Hacks, or Armada or just completely run through an ice climber and think we should absolutely disregard them. When Fox says the reads, Ices have nothing, as they can't get the two climbers together for the grab, or sometimes even get the grab at all. Peach is slightly less destructive than a perfect Fox, but it's so much easier to get her there that she seems like an insurmountable mountain as well. Most people who dismiss ice climbers do so with this sort of thing in mind, asserting that when their opponent is playing well, ice climbers lose their way. But competition isn't, and has never, been about just who's better. It's about who's better on that day. Icies tend to be inconsistent and better in best-of-3 tournaments, and I think their mixed success has to be based on fear and the human elements and chaos of the game. I think Icies have to be dependent on opponents' mistakes and the players' reads on said mistakes, and that's a blessing and a curse. It does make it very hard at times, but I've said for years that at any time an Icies player can acquire the power of God and overperform to an impressive extent, just like Toucan last week, Nintendo to Genesis 3, or Wobbles at Evolution 2013. Sometimes things go right, and sometimes they don't, but regardless, I think it's chaos that keeps this character alive. Infinite is a lot of power, and if the buttons fall at the right times, there's no reason Icies can't decimate anything in their way. It's an unpleasant subject for some, but I want to hear what you think. Are your thoughts on Icies in a more extreme place? Are your recent experiences with them as horrible as mine are? Seriously, I'm going to take a while to get back to normal. Regardless, I want to hear your point of view. I've shared mine, and I want to keep the discussion going. If you give me something, I'll get back to what you have, and then I'll begin the discussion all over again next week.